All right, thank you. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Daryl Kimball, still at the Arms Control Association, and I'm very pleased today to welcome our keynote luncheon speaker, Pranay Vaddi, who is Special Assistant to President Biden and Senior Director for Arms Control, Disarmament, and Nonproliferation at the National Security Council. Pranay, I think, is one of the best informed and experienced people we could have serving in this critical role at the White House at this critical time. Since he joined the NSC staff in early 2022, and in his previous positions at the Department of State's Bureau of Arms Control Verification and Compliance, which has a new name, but I prefer the old name, he has been deeply involved in issues relating to implementation of the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the controversy and the effort to save the INF Treaty, strategic stability talks with Russia. And more recently, while at the NSC, he's been involved in the issues and problems related to the Outer Space Treaty, implementation of the President's Nuclear Posture Review, U.S. extended deterrence discussions with our allies, the Iran nuclear file, the development of future U.S. nuclear arms control options and strategies, just to name a few. We've invited Pranay to join us here today to provide an update on U.S. nuclear weapons policy and future directions for arms control. You might consider this to be something of a follow-up to the keynote address delivered last year at the Arms Control Association meeting in this room by White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on U.S. deterrence and arms control strategy. And after Pranay speaks, we're going to have time to take questions from the audience, which once again we'll be collecting on the note cards that are on your tables. So with that, Pranay, come up to the podium. We're eager to hear more about the administration's current view of the nuclear landscape and how we navigate the path forward.
Thank you for that introduction, Daryl. As you went through your list of the different things I've been doing in this current job, I just immediately felt my energy leave my body thinking about how busy we've been. But I really do appreciate that kind introduction, and I want to thank the Arms Control Association for bringing us all together today for this important set of conversations. And most importantly, I want to thank all of you for giving me this opportunity to address you, to update you on where things stand and in the administration's approach to this set of important issues. Since the dawn of the nuclear era, the United States has focused on a central goal: reducing the risk of a catastrophic nuclear conflict occurring. President Biden has been personally committed to reducing nuclear dangers throughout his career, and since day one of this administration. We are committed to seeking the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons, with undiminished security for all, to upholding strategic stability, to working with allies and partners to strengthen arms control and nonproliferation under the rules-based international order, and to reducing the global salience of nuclear weapons. We have pursued these goals with urgency, as well as pragmatism, balancing the imperative to maintain the capability and will to deter aggression or a nuclear attack, against the need to control the buildup and further spread of nuclear weapons. The need for this dual-track approach was described aptly by President Carter, who said, "National weakness, real or perceived, can tempt aggression and thus cause war. That's why the United States can never neglect its military strength. We must and we will remain strong. But with equal determination," he went on to say, "the United States and all countries must find ways to control and reduce the horrifying danger that is posed by the enormous world stockpiles of nuclear arms." In the period following the Cold War, the world made significant progress in reducing nuclear dangers thanks to U.S. leadership. Together, we reduced the salience of nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction threats. We strengthened the international nonproliferation regime and the global commitment to nuclear security. And we limited the strategic arsenals of the largest nuclear powers. Just 15 years ago, we would have celebrated the trajectory that we were on. But the last decade has revealed cracks in each of these pillars. cracks that, as the National Security Advisor said at this forum last year, run substantial and deep. Russia, the PRC, and North Korea are all expanding and diversifying their nuclear arsenals at a breakneck pace, showing little or no interest in arms control. Those three, together with Iran, are increasingly cooperating and coordinating with each other in ways that run counter to peace and stability, threaten the United States, our allies and our partners, and exacerbate regional tensions. They are also freely proliferating advanced missile and drone technology among one another and around the globe. They also possess capabilities relevant to chemical and biological warfare that pose a threat to the United States, allied and partner forces, as well as civilian populations. Russian forces have even used chemical weapons and riot control agents on the battlefield in Ukraine, in violation of Moscow's obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention. This is a new and dangerous era, marked by evolving proliferation risks and rapid changes in technology. It's an era that demands we adapt both our strategy and our solutions. So today I want to describe how we are adapting our approach to arms control and nonproliferation for this new era. In each pillar, demonstrating what it means to take action as a responsible nuclear power, preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and continuing to pursue arms control arrangements, there should be no question. We've adjusted our strategy to account for a more complex and worsening security environment, but we are in no way abandoning our principles. We are taking a more competitive approach. First, this administration remains determined to lead by the power of our example, to show what it means to act responsibly as a nuclear power, and encourage others to do the same, to ensure that all 5 nuclear weapon states live up to their statement that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. In terms of our capabilities, we are developing and fielding only what is required to deter. The President recently issued updated nuclear weapons employment guidance, which takes into account the realities of a new nuclear era. It emphasizes the need to account for the growth and diversity of the PRC's nuclear arsenal and the need to deter Russia, the PRC, and North Korea simultaneously. It also reaffirms our commitment to use arms control and other tools to minimize the number of nuclear weapons needed to achieve U.S. objectives, and reiterates that the United States will continue to abide by New START limits for the duration of the treaty, so long as Russia does the same. Unlike our adversaries, we will not develop radiation-spewing, nuclear-powered cruise missiles or nuclear weapons designed to be placed in orbit, which would be a clear violation of the Outer Space Treaty. We will continue to uphold the global norm against nuclear explosive testing. We remain committed to bringing the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty into force. And we will ask the world to join us in supporting a treaty to cut off production of fissile material for nuclear weapons. We will continue to forswear chemical and biological weapons, meet our obligations under the Chemical and Biological Weapons Conventions, and hold countries accountable for compliance. Indeed, this administration completed the destruction of the U.S. chemical weapons stockpile last year. A disarmament milestone decades in the making that earned our workers and technicians this association's distinction of Arms Control Persons of the Year for 2023. In our doctrine, we have reaffirmed that U.S. nuclear weapons are reserved for deterring strategic attack by those that threaten us and our allies and partners with nuclear weapons. And we will maintain a human in the loop for all decisions regarding nuclear weapon employment. Together with the United Kingdom and France, and in stark contrast to the PRC, we have committed to transparency regarding our nuclear policies and forces. However, we know that leading by example has only limited influence on our adversaries' behaviors these days. If they're unwilling to follow and instead take steps to increase the salience of nuclear weapons, we will have no choice but to adjust our posture and capabilities to preserve deterrence and stability. Stable deterrence, that is what we're aiming for with our posture. Toward that end, we're modernizing each leg of our nuclear triad, updating our nuclear command, control, and communication systems, and investing in our nuclear enterprise to ensure that we can sustain and, if necessary, enhance our capabilities and posture. We remain confident in our position today, and as the National Security Advisor made clear, we do not need to increase our nuclear forces to match or outnumber the combined total of our competitors to successfully deter them. But without a change in trajectory that Russia, the PRC, and North Korea are on, the United States will need to continue to adjust our posture and capabilities to ensure our ability to deter and meet other objectives going forward. we've already taken some prudent steps in this regard. For example, we decided to pursue the B-6113 gravity bomb to provide an additional capability against certain harder and large area military targets. And that will allow us to move beyond the outdated megaton class B-83-1 that we seek to retire. We are also seeking to extend the life of certain Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines to provide additional margin during the transition from legacy to modern capabilities across the triad. The B-6113 is an example of a qualitative improvement to our arsenal that aligns with our approach. It will enhance deterrence without increasing overall numbers, unduly stressing the existing program of record, or requiring any substantial new resources that would force a trade-off with other defense priorities. As we consider potential adjustments, we will carefully keep in mind the implications for strategic stability, the capacity of our defense and nuclear enterprise, and competing budget priorities. We're focused on a better approach, not necessarily a more approach, which will require some creative solutions and potentially discrete capabilities that fill an important niche. But let me be clear, absent a change in the trajectory of adversary arsenals, we may reach a point in the coming years where an increase from current deployed numbers is required. And we need to be fully prepared to execute if the president makes that decision, if he makes that decision. If that day does come, it will result from a determination that more nuclear weapons are required to deter our adversaries and protect the American people and our allies and partners. It will not be a simplistic calculation that more for them requires more for us. The second area of focus for our administration is preventing the spread of nuclear weapons and other strategic capabilities by strengthening the global nonproliferation regime. Extended deterrence has been one of our greatest contributions to the nonproliferation regime. For decades, U.S. security guarantees have persuaded many of our allies that they do not need to develop nuclear weapons of their own to deter against the greatest threats that they face. The continued success of extended deterrence is not, however, a foregone conclusion. Allies face ever-increasing nuclear and conventional threats from Russia, the PRC, and North Korea, and may worry about the credibility of our guarantees. Under the President's leadership, we have fully invested in strengthening our alliance system to ensure that extended deterrence continues to contribute to nonproliferation. The Washington Declaration between the United States and South Korea is an example of our efforts to jointly approach nuclear scenarios with our allies as equal partners. NATO is also taking steps to improve its capabilities, posture, exercises, and planning. This is work we are advancing ahead of the Washington summit to account for Russia's actions in Europe, including in the nuclear domain. In both Asia and Europe, we are looking for ways that allies can contribute to nuclear deterrence, whether by easing the burden on U.S. conventional or dual-capable forces, or stepping up their conventional support to U.S. nuclear operations in a contingency. Enabling greater participation will increase allied confidence in U.S. security guarantees and achieve this extended deterrence for nonproliferation approach that we've taken. This administration also continues to uphold the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty as the cornerstone of the global nuclear nonproliferation regime. We are committed to advancing all three NPT pillars: disarmament, nonproliferation, and the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. We are reestablishing U.S. leadership in the peaceful use of nuclear energy by making significant investments in our domestic industry and banning Russian uranium imports. And we are using that leadership to ensure that new reactor designs integrate the highest standards of safety, security, and safeguards, to export our nonproliferation values through nuclear supply arrangements, and to prevent the spread of sensitive enrichment and reprocessing technology to new countries. We are also seeking to establish nonproliferation norms as part of the administration's effort to accelerate the development of fusion energy, and are working with like-minded countries to establish a framework for guardrails on fusion energy systems, equipment, and related materials. We are committed to working closely with the IAEA to maintain the safe, secure, and peaceful use of nuclear technology, including on AUKUS, where we are working to set the highest nonproliferation standard as part of our cooperation with Australia and the United Kingdom. A related aspect of our nonproliferation policy approach is strategic trade controls. We have traditionally worked through the multilateral arrangements to limit the spread of long-range missile technology that could be used to deliver nuclear weapons. And we continue to advance strategic trade controls internationally by improving coordination among like-minded partners, strengthening existing multilateral regimes, and taking steps to address any gaps that may emerge. But there are limits to this consensus-based approach in a more competitive environment. Our adversaries are blatantly disregarding their commitments and standing in the way of reforms. To support its war in Ukraine, Russia has turned to the PRC to prop up its defense industrial base. North Korea to provide artillery and missiles, and Iran to provide missiles and drones. Russia is increasing its defense cooperation with all three and creating concerns as to what capabilities and know-how Russia may share as payment for the assistance it's receiving. It has also been blocking new controls from being implemented on the most advanced technologies in the Wassenaar Arrangement. Given the blatant steps by our adversaries to undermine the missile technology control regime, we are working to streamline our trade and cooperation to boost allied and partner defense capabilities, particularly with regard to long-range strike. We are calibrating our small yard, high fence of controls to ensure that we can enable our allies and partners to strengthen their defense and deterrence. We are looking to create new opportunities for exports and co-production that have been challenging because of existing controls and licensing requirements, not only within AUKUS, but among a broader set of allies and partners. A final area of our where our non-proliferation policy has adapted has been with regard to Iran. The President remains as resolved as ever to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, and we are prepared to use all elements of national power to ensure that outcome. We've been increasing pressure on Iran through a combination of sanctions, deterrence, and international isolation, including sanctioning over 700 additional individuals and entities connected to the full range of Iran's problematic and dangerous behaviors in this administration. We have long said that diplomacy is the best way to achieve a sustainable, effective solution to Iran's nuclear program. Iran's escalations related to its nuclear program, support for Russia and support for Hamas, have undermined our ability to compartmentalize Iran-related issues and caused us to lose opportunities for multilateral diplomacy. We must, therefore, focus on setting the conditions for future diplomacy by taking steps to underscore to Iran the consequences of its nuclear escalations, building leverage, redoubling coordination with key partners, encouraging the PRC to press Iran to cease destabilizing behavior, and insisting that Iran fully cooperate with the IAEA and not further escalate its nuclear program. Earlier this week, we voted in favor of a Board of Governors resolution that calls out Iran for its lack of cooperation with the IAEA. We also supported a comprehensive report by the IAEA to provide a greater understanding of the agency's outstanding concerns regarding Iran. Such a report will be important as we approach a key inflection point in October 2025, when the UN Security Council could close consideration of the Iran nuclear issue under Resolution 2231. Above all, our objective has been and will remain a diplomatic solution that ensures that Iran's nuclear program is exclusively peaceful. For the third pillar of our approach, we continue to prioritize arms control. U.S. leadership on arms control and risk reduction makes tangible contributions to global security. It also affirms the importance that we place on taking tangible steps under Article 6 of the NPT. And it builds our credibility with close allies and partners and non-aligned countries. The President made clear at the UN last September that no matter what else is happening in the world, the United States is ready to pursue critical arms control measures. We are upholding that promise by thinking through what a future arms control agreement with Russia after New START might look like. In any future agreement, our goal will be to reduce nuclear threats to the United States and our allies and partners by limiting and shaping adversary nuclear forces. Without a doubt, the type of limits we will be able to agree to with Russia will be impacted by the size and scale of the PRC's nuclear buildup and U.S. deterrence needs vis-à-vis Beijing. We're also investing in new monitoring and verification technologies and approaches, both to solidify existing agreements and set the stage for a future where the arms control arrangement, subject matter, and implementation may be very different than in the past. What's more, this administration is vigorously pursuing the arms control opportunities that do exist. We're pushing for results-based discussions at every major multilateral body that seeks to limit nuclear and other WMD risks: the United Nations, the NPT Preparatory Committee and Review Conference, the P5, the Conference on Disarmament, the Chemical Weapons Convention, and the Biological Weapons Convention, among many others. We are thinking creatively about the content and mechanisms of arms control and pursuing opportunities when they arise, even where treaty-based solutions are not going to be available. We've committed to not conduct destructive, direct-ascent anti-satellite missile testing and put forth proposals for responsible behavior in space and principles for the responsible military use of artificial intelligence, all unilaterally. We are working to institutionalize these new norms by bringing them into UN mechanisms. We are also supporting arms control through accountability. Together with our NATO allies, we suspended the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe in response to Russia's withdrawal, opening the possibility of larger U.S. conventional force deployments and exercises in Eastern Europe. We enacted lawful countermeasures in response to Russia's suspension of New START that ensure Moscow would garner no advantage. States parties to the Chemical Weapons Convention also voted to oust Russia from the governing body of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. This was fitting given Russia's continued violations of the convention and unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine. But at least in the near term, the prospects for strategic arms control are dim. Russia's outright rejection of arms control dialogue casts a shadow over the likelihood of a New START successor after February 2026. We must be prepared for that possibility, that these constraints disappear without replacement. With the PRC, the United States has offered a number of specific proposals focused on managing strategic risks in connection with the bilateral consultation held last year. The PRC has shown no interest in engaging on these proposals and rejected holding up a follow-on arms control-focused meeting. With North Korea, too, our attempts to engage on risk reduction and nuclear issues have been answered with more missile tests and greater hostility to us and our close allies. In their outright refusal to even discuss arms control, Russia and the PRC are failing to meet their international obligations. Practically speaking, they are forcing the United States and our close allies and partners to prepare for a world where nuclear competition occurs without numerical constraints. The reality is that further enhancing our capabilities and posture is incredibly important to rejuvenating strategic arms control. It will incentivize Russia and the PRC to engage in arms control, frame the subject matter at the heart of those engagements, provide the United States with leverage in those engagements, and prepare us for an environment in which they may continue to refuse engagement. We need to persuade our adversaries that managing rivalry through arms control is preferable to unrestrained competition across domains. Let me close with this. We should be under no illusions about the challenges ahead, but we have a tremendous opportunity to chart a new path for arms control and nonproliferation. Same goals, new approach. I look forward to continuing to work with all of you to make that happen. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Pranay. That was a full menu of items for us to digest, and I would ask folks to please give my staff your questions so that I can help engage Pranay in a conversation about those questions. But to start, let me just ask you a couple things that are on everyone's minds, particularly in the last few days. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine started and President Putin issued nuclear threats of various kinds in 2022. He's issued some variations in the past week in response to the U.S. and European assistance for Ukraine's defense. So we are living in a world in which there's a heightened risk of nuclear weapons use as long as that conflict goes on. President Biden has said that the use of tactical nuclear weapons anywhere would lead to World War III, to nuclear Armageddon. So describe briefly, what is the president's strategy for managing this risk, engaging with Russia to the extent we can. There's even a 1973 agreement on the prevention of nuclear war that seems to be sitting somewhere on the back shelf. Is that still something that might be employed?
Thanks for that question, Daryl. It's obviously a very contemporary issue and hangs over the discussions you're all having today. We are very cognizant of the increase in nuclear rhetoric and nuclear risks as it relates to the Ukraine conflict, which is why we're trying to be very prudent in our approach, particularly in our security assistance approach. But we can't allow Russia's nuclear threats to dissuade us from assisting Ukraine in the defense of their own territory. The new policy is consistent with that, I think, that you referenced. That new policy applies to counterfire capabilities that are deployed just across the border. It does not apply to ATACMS or long-range strikes, and it's meant to enable the Ukrainians to defend themselves against what would otherwise be considered a Russian sanctuary right across the border that's enabling these furtherance of their offensive attacks. And I think we have to just address this reality that's before us, as Putin announced last year regarding the stationing of non-strategic nuclear weapons in Belarus, this concerning anti-satellite capability related to a new satellite designed to carry a nuclear weapon. We see those risks rising. We see that rhetoric increasing. And we feel that the lessons that we have learned is that we need to have a dialogue to discuss those issues. We proposed such a dialogue with the goal of kind of discussing and clarifying, deconflicting as a way to manage nuclear risks that we see as very much at issue right now. The Russian Federation has refused to have those talks. They continue to refuse to have those talks. But we continue to have to be prudent unilaterally in our policy approach to ensure that we're calibrating given the nuclear risks that exist.
All right, very good. We'll have a lot of questions here. I'm going to try to move on before you need to leave, which is in about 15 minutes or so, unfortunately. We got a number of questions about something the UN Secretary General referred to in his remarks and in reference to U.S. engagement with China. The Secretary General suggested, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the nuclear armed states need to engage in dialogue to make sure that no one uses nuclear weapons first, and to agree that no one should use nuclear weapons first. That, after all, is the logical corollary of the joint statement that a nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought. So, as you know, in recent weeks, China has floated the idea in some speeches about a joint no first use agreement. President Biden, during the campaign 4 years ago, said that he would adopt a policy that says the sole purpose of nuclear weapons is to deter attack, which suggests not to initiate nuclear attack. What is the United States' approach to this? And before you answer, let me just note that for those of you who read Arms Control Today, and I'm sure that's everyone in this room, you will have seen the interview we did with Assistant Secretary of State Mallory Stewart about this question, and she said that the United States would be interested in engaging with China on this dialogue, but would have many questions about what their proposal, what their approach is. So if you could elaborate on that and tell us why that isn't an opportunity to engage with China on risk reduction in the days and weeks ahead.
Sure. So first, I'm happy to expand on kind of Mallory's answer there, but I want to note that these types of discussions of nuclear policy and doctrine have been a topic of discussion within the P5 experts meetings, and our arms control experts at the State Department have really been tip of the spear in trying to engage the PRC, Russia, and of course our P3 allies on a regular basis on these topics. And I think for the PRC to really want to engage on this topic, it would make sense for them to try to initiate a more serious discussion in that format, which we do not shy away from. We're not afraid to engage on these issues. That's why we have been the ones who are always asking for the engagement. If the PRC is interested in making a specific proposal on a no first use treaty through appropriate channels, we're happy to hear them out. I think it's hard to tell if this is a real proposal or not because, frankly, this was a kind of a side issue raised in a speech at the Conference on Disarmament, and there has been no diplomatic follow-up. We're not the ones who are avoiding a detailed dialogue. As I mentioned, we are the ones who are trying to initiate more and more detailed dialogue to be even more transparent about our nuclear doctrine and policy, and try to better understand any changes that are happening in China and Russia's approach to nuclear policy as well. So we're open to seeing a proposal from the PRC if they choose to make it, but I guess I should reiterate that we have a channel that we tried to create. We had a consultation late last year. They have formally rejected having that consultation again where we would discuss these issues. And so I'm not sure what the next move is there.
And of course, China is chairing the P5 process, the group that is there to discuss.
I believe Russia's chairing it this year, and
China takes the chair later this year, right? Okay, you spoke a bit about the situation with respect to Iran's sensitive nuclear activities. Obviously, the decision to withdraw from the JCPOA has not been very helpful. Further sanctions have not changed Iran's behavior. If you could just describe, what the administration is trying to do to engage with Iran, especially as they have a shift in leadership of some kind. It may not be very much. This could be an opportunity to pursue the approach that you all were pursuing about a year ago, a mutual de-escalatory path. Isn't this a good time to try to do that before this situation gets worse?
No, thanks for that. And I think, as I mentioned, we're really focused right now, given the political realities in Tehran, with their own leadership change. Obviously, we have an election coming up here in the United States as well. We want to ensure that we maintain some plateau of escalation, no further nuclear escalations, to create an environment that's conducive to discussing back at the table a diplomatic deal. That's been our focus right now. I don't want to forecast when we will sort of pick that up again when there's a new leadership in Tehran. But from our perspective, and we think that our allies are aligned on this, we need to focus on making sure that de-escalation is the theme of our engagements in the coming months. And I will say that is, of course, most importantly for me, tied to the nuclear file, but it does have elements of regional stability and the crisis that is still taking place in the Middle East as well.
All right. So in the earlier panel today, we had a discussion about how much is enough, decisions about U.S. nuclear modernization costs and force size. And I think it was Hans Christensen who raised a point about the term minimum deterrence and how this can be used by nuclear armed states to justify any number of nuclear weapons that for whatever reason they decide they need to have. So, you mentioned that as we look forward to what Russia and China may or may not do going forward, the U.S. may need to adjust. What specifically, what are the questions that you and your team are going to put forward to this president about what he needs to think about before making any decisions about increasing the size of the U.S. arsenal for the first time in, 40 years? And specifically, I mean, what does, when we have about 1,700 deployed nuclear weapons, when you count the bombers, how much more does an additional 100 or 200 do to really change the perspective of our adversaries about initiating nuclear war?
Great. Well, in a previous job at Carnegie, I would be able to engage more fully on all of these topics. But let me take a crack at that, Daryl. I think it's a great question. It's obviously a very important question as we think particularly about the expiration of New START. And I keep coming back to this milestone because to me, that is the point at which we have sort of two paths ahead of us. There's been no predetermination that the United States will need to its day-to-day deployed. I think the reasons for having an increase in your day-to-day deployed strategic nuclear weapons have to be pretty compelling for a decision to be made to do that. I think one of the main triggers for that, or at least indicators that we have to pay attention to, is what the PRC ends up doing. They're continuing to build up their forces. They're continuing to do so at a pretty rapid pace. As those of you who focus on the Chinese nuclear arsenal know, the China Military Power Report that comes out annually has highlighted in the past year some disturbing realities that we have to face regarding how China is thinking about lower yield nuclear weapons, how they're thinking about novel nuclear weapons, smaller yield nuclear weapons and their purpose in a potential Taiwan contingency, and potential changes to how they posture alert nuclear forces, in a potential shift to something that's called early warning counterstrike. This is, of course, all publicly available, which is why I feel comfortable talking about it in detail. But the reality is those are important considerations for us to bear in mind as we march towards February 6, 2026. Now, the reality is the administration has a preferred approach, and we want that preferred approach to also be preferred by Russia and China. For us, that looks like initiating a conversation with Russia on a New START follow-on agreement or set of agreements to ensure that we feel at least there continue to be constraints between the United States and our largest nuclear adversary. I think we feel that Russia, at least as of today, since the suspension of New START, their illegal suspension of New START last year, they at least continue to see value in maintaining limits on deployed strategic nuclear weapons. That's a good thing. We agree with that, and that's why we're doing it as well. And we will continue to maintain those limits until New START's expiration with the hope that we can initiate a conversation with Russia about what comes next before that treaty expires. But the fact of the matter is we've seen no indication that Russia wants to have that conversation soon. And as many of you know who are more astute observers of arms control history than even I am, it takes a long time to nail down the details of an agreement on strategic arms. And so from our perspective, we should have started that conversation. That's why we proposed starting that conversation last fall. and we continue to have an open door to having that conversation with Russia. And as it relates to the PRC, I hope that they will be willing to re-engage in our consultation process on arms control soon, knowing that their behavior, the changes that they are making, will impact our ability and the tenor of the agreement that we may be able to strike with Russia.
Okay, all right, that's very helpful. And I mean, just a quick follow-up, which is that, given that the Russians so far have not accepted the very good offer for talks without preconditions on a new strategic arms control agreement, and you'd say that you want to have a more competitive approach to nuclear arms control policy. I mean, what might the interim approach be? And I would just take us back to 1980, 81. The SALT II treaty was put on the shelf. And yet the two sides, SALT II was not exactly my favorite treaty either, but it was a treaty. The two sides agreed to abide by the limits for a period of time, which created greater stability. So is that an example that might be employed through unilateral reciprocal steps? Is that an option that is on the table, so to speak, in your discussions internally?
So, I mean, there's a range of possibilities. That could be one as well. I think we, of course, don't want to settle. We want to approach this seriously and in a way that will provide maximum benefit to our national security and that of our allies and partners. We've publicly signaled in the past few years what types of things could be the subject matter of a follow-on agreement, whether it's sort of a continuation of New START-like provisions on strategic deployed weapons, an agreement that could cover all warheads, and an agreement that would bring in newer long-range systems, novel weapons that were not previously covered under strategic arms control agreements. And so I think the subject matter is kind of clear to the expert community, what could be covered, what should be covered, but the format is a very important consideration. The realities of trying to negotiate with Russia in this day and age is a very real consideration. And the fact that the Ukraine conflict is ongoing, and at least as of today, Russia's policy is to not engage us on these issues, given our current policy towards Ukraine, our support for their defense, and unless they are willing to change that and compartmentalize arms control discussions, at least as it relates to the strategic nuclear arsenal, it's difficult to see when that conversation can begin. But I want to be clear, from a U.S. perspective, we will be prepared for that discussion to happen in advance of February 6, 2026. I hope Russia is ready to engage before then as well. And what we're going to do through the different actions we have here, international fora, domestically, et cetera, is try to incentivize Russia to take us up on that conversation and see what comes.
And do you have plans to outline some of the ideas the United States would like to talk with the Russians about in this range of options at some point in the near future?
We will. I don't know about near future, but certainly in the future.
Okay. All right. Well, let us know. We can set up another lunch for you and have another conversation. All right. We have just a couple more questions and just a little bit of time, and then I want to ask you if there's anything that we have not asked you about that you want to mention. But we've been talking about how we need to assure our allies. Some of our allies and partners, Ukraine, some of the other states in the former Soviet Union, are feeling a little bit more nervous in the last couple of years because of the nuclear threats. One of the things the United States has committed to but hasn't followed through on is the nuclear weapons free zone treaties, South Pacific, Africa, Central Asia, that contain legally binding assurances against nuclear attack or nuclear threats. Does the United States still support these treaties, which were sent to the Senate, I think, over a decade ago? What are we doing to try to move those along to bring especially the Central Asia zone into force?
We do still support the free zone treaties, and we are looking for ways to signal that continued support to the Senate.
All right. All right. We have a lot of different questions here. This has been, as I said, a very large menu. I hope we can pick up the conversation with the administration in some other fora. Is there something that we have not been able to say that you need to let us know about that was missing from your notes or your talking points?
No, I think we covered it. I'm not going to fall into the trap of volunteering Q&A.
It's not a trap, it's an
you.
invitation. Okay.
But I am, of course, very open to talking to you all again. Appreciate you paying attention to what was a long and detailed conversation over lunch, and fully understand the need to, and I'm willing to be as transparent as possible about this administration's policies in this area, and I think it's of critical importance that we all are talking to one another right now as we enter this extremely difficult era.
All right, and I just have one small request. Last year, we had the National Security Advisor speaking at our meeting. This year, we had the Secretary General of the United Nations, video. So next year, if Nonproliferation Joe wants to, he's more than welcome to come and speak with us.
We'll pass it on.
All right, please pass it on. Please join me in thanking Pranay and his team. And we're going to take another short break while we shift to the next part of our program. So we'll be right back.